Welcome to Fog Street Mysteries, where every story begins in shadows and every clue glows under a single street lamp. If you love fog-soaked alleys, tense interrogations, and the electric thrill of unraveling a mystery, you're in the right place. Step inside, the next case is already waiting. Don't forget to share thoughts. Your feedback keeps the mystery alive. Now let's begin. Nero Wolfe and the Phantom Publisher, a classic Nero Wolfe noir mystery. Chapter 1, The Publisher Who Didn't Exist. If you've never tried to drag a fact out of a nervous man who thinks every shadow is a process server, you've missed one of the quieter forms of entertainment New York offers. It was a raw midweek afternoon, gray light, damp sidewalks, taxis hissing like annoyed cats, and I was at my desk in the front room of Nero Wolfe's brownstone, doing the kind of paperwork that makes a man consider a life of crime for variety. Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms, communing with his orchids, which he did with more reverence than most people reserve for religion. Fritz was in the kitchen, and the house carried the usual comforting smells, polished wood, good cooking, and the faint, expensive breath of flowers that didn't grow for amateurs. The doorbell rang. I sighed the sigh of a man who has learned that doorbells are never good news. I got up, opened the door, and found a young fellow standing on the stoop like he'd been nailed there. He had a narrow face, a damp hat clutched in both hands, and eyes that flicked past me into the hall as if he expected a Tommy gun to poke out of the umbrella stand. "Mr. Goodwin?" he asked. "That depends," I said. "If you're selling magazine subscriptions, I'm my own twin brother." He swallowed. My name is Calvin Hart. I wrote to Mr. Wolfe." "Oh," I said, stepping back. "That's different. Come in before you catch pneumonia and sue us for it." He came in like the floor might bite. I took his hat because if you don't, people tend to keep wringing it until it resembles boiled cabbage. He had the look of a man who slept in short shifts and never reached the deep, healing part. "Sit," I told him, pointing to the red leather chair across from my desk. "Wolfe's upstairs. He'll be down when he's done telling plants how pretty they are." Calvin sat on the edge, like he was only borrowing the chair. "You want coffee?" I asked. He shook his head too fast. No, thank you. Mr. Wolfe must see me. It's important." "Everything's important," I said. "If it wasn't, it wouldn't come ringing my bell." He leaned forward, voice low. "He's gone." I waited. It's a trick I've learned, let people hang themselves with their own nouns. "The publisher," Calvin said. "My publisher." That got my attention, because publishers don't usually vanish. They multiply. "Your publisher took a train." "A boat?" A vow of silence. Calvin's fingers knotted together. "He disappeared. And I think someone is going to kill me." That's the line that always makes the room feel smaller. I've heard it from slick men, dumb men, desperate women, and once from a priest. It's never said casually. "Name?" I asked. Calvin wet his lips. "Elias Vane." "Elias Vane," I repeated. Sounds like he ought to be signing first editions with a fountain pen and a sneer. "What does he publish?" "My book," Calvin said, almost proudly, and then the pride crumbled. "My novel. The Ashes of Winter. It's been talked about." "Talked about how?" I asked. "Critics," he said. "They're watching. One of them, Hollis Crane, called it a cheap fever dream with delusions of grandeur. Vane said Crane would regret it." I whistled softly. "Your publisher threatens critics?" Calvin flinched at the sound. "Not in so many words. But Vane, he had ways. He knew people. He could ruin you without raising his voice." I stood up. "You want Mr. Wolfe? You'll get him. But I need a few plain facts so I don't deliver you upstairs as a wrapped surprise. Where's this Vane's office?" Calvin blinked. "Madison Avenue. That narrows it to a few hundred addresses." "Which building?" He hesitated, just a heartbeat too long. The Langford Building. Suite 1206. Phone number. I don't, he stopped. His cheeks reddened. I don't have it memorized. It's on my contract. Handy, I murmured. And where's your contract? In my coat pocket. He fumbled, pulled out a folded document and slid it toward me as if it might explode. I skimmed it. It was a publishing agreement on heavy paper, with a neat letterhead, Vane House in serif capitals, an address, and a signature. The signature was bold and theatrical, Elias Vane. The paper smelled faintly of ink and cigars, like it had been stored in a place where men did business late and lied early. You signed this in the office? I asked. Yes. Meet Vane in person? Of course. What's he look like? Calvin's eyes darted again. Tall. Dark hair. Thin. Elegant. Scar on his left cheek. Left, I said, because people lie most easily about what they can't prove. And he vanished when? 2 days ago. He didn't show up to a meeting. Then his secretary, Miss Lorna Pike, said he was out of town. But she looked frightened. Maybe she finally read your book, I offered. Calvin didn't smile. His eyes were on the hall, as if the shadows had started moving. I heard the soft, heavy tread from the stairs and knew Wolfe was descending. The temperature in the room always drops a degree when he enters, like the air remembers it's in the presence of a man who doesn't tolerate nonsense for sport. Nero Wolfe came in wearing his customary yellow shirt and dark tie, his bulk arranged with dignity. He didn't glance at me. He looked at Calvin Hart with the calm focus of a judge examining a witness who might perjure himself out of habit. Mr. Hart, Wolfe said, settling into his red leather armchair behind the desk that made it look like a throne. Archie tells me your publisher has vanished. Calvin stood halfway, then sat again at Wolfe's nod. Yes, sir. Elias Vane. I don't know what to do. What you do, Wolfe said, is tell the truth. If you cannot, you will leave. Calvin swallowed. I'm telling the truth. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Are you? Mr. Goodwin, bring me the file. I handed Wolfe the contract. He held it in those large hands that could have crushed a grapefruit without strain, then read slowly, as if each word had to pass inspection. His lips twitched, Wolfe's version of a raised eyebrow. Vane House, he said softly. Archie. I knew what he wanted. I went to the phone, dialed information, and asked for Vane House on Madison Avenue. The operator made me wait long enough to hear a taxi horn argue with another taxi horn outside. I'm sorry, she said at last. No listing. Try Elias Vane, I said. Pause. No listing. Suite 1206, Langford Building, I said, because I'm stubborn, too. She tried. Came back. Suite 1206 is listed as vacant. I glanced at Wolfe. His face didn't change, but the room did. It gained weight. I hung up. No listing. Suite's vacant. Calvin made a strangled sound. That's impossible. I was there. I signed. Wolfe held up the contract, tapping the address with one thick finger. Observe, Mr. Hart. There is no phone number. No incorporation. No witnesses. And the language is curious. He looked at me. Archie, read paragraph 9. I did. It was the usual royalty clause, but the phrasing was too ornate, too careful, like someone imitating what they thought legal writing should sound like. It used the word hereinbefore twice, which is 2 times more than necessary in any healthy document. Wolfe's eyes fixed on Calvin. You say you met Mr. Vane. You say he has a secretary. Yet he is a phantom. Explain. Calvin's hands shook. I don't understand. I swear I met him. He paid me in advance. Wolfe's head tilted slightly. Paid you? In what form? A check. From what bank? Calvin blinked hard. City National. Do you have the cancelled check? Wolfe asked. Calvin's mouth opened and closed. It's in my apartment. Of course, I said, because it always is. Wolfe leaned back. Mr. Hart, either you are a fool, or you are part of a deception. Possibly both. You have come here in fear. Fear can be a useful stimulant. It can also be a narcotic. Calvin's eyes glistened. Someone's been calling me. Late at night. Breathing. Then a voice, distorted, saying, "The next edition is your last." That line sent a cold finger up my spine. It was theatrical, yes, but theater is often where killers hide, because people underestimate it. Wolfe's gaze shifted to the window as a cab splashed through a puddle outside. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "go to the Langford Building. Suite 1206. Confirm whether it is vacant. Speak to the superintendent. If there is a Miss Pike, find her." Calvin jerked. "Please, don't leave me alone." Wolfe looked at him as if weighing him in his mind. "You will remain here until Mr. Goodwin returns," he said. "If you wish to be safe, you will obey Fritz and keep your hands away from my orchids." "I'll stay," Calvin whispered, like a man agreeing to surgery. I grabbed my hat and coat. "You heard the boss. Sit tight. Don't touch anything. And if the phone rings and it's a breathing contest, hang up." I was halfway down the steps when the doorbell rang again, sharp, impatient. Fritz wasn't near, Wolfe didn't move, Calvin startled as if shot. I opened the door. A uniformed cop stood there, wet cap brim low, eyes hard. Behind him, Inspector Kramer's bulk filled the stoop like a courthouse. "Goodwin," Kramer barked. "We got a body. And your name came up." That's how a quiet afternoon turns into a case. I felt the air in the hall tighten like a noose. "What body?" I asked. Kramer's eyes slid past me into the brownstone, as if the walls had ears. "Hollis Crane," he said. "Book critic. Found in his office an hour ago. Dead. And there's a manuscript on his desk with your boss's address written on the wrapper." I didn't move for a second. I could hear Wolfe's chair creak faintly upstairs, like a lion shifting in his den. Then I stepped aside and let Kramer in. And somewhere behind me, in the quiet front room, Calvin Hart made a sound that told me the Phantom Publisher had just stopped being a parlor trick and started being something that killed. Chapter 2, Words That Kill. If you've ever wondered what it feels like to have your name come up in a homicide, I recommend you try it only once, and preferably under a different name. Inspector Kramer stood in our front hall dripping authority and rainwater, his jaw set in that special way that meant he was looking at me but talking to the idea of trouble. "A critic," I said, buying time. "Hollis Crane. Dead. And a manuscript with our address on it. That's the whole song." Kramer snorted. "You'll hear the verses at the office. Get your hat." "I already have my hat," I told him, tapping the brim. "It's the rest of my life I'd like to keep." Behind me, I could feel Wolfe's presence in the doorway to the office without needing to see him. When Nero Wolfe moves quickly, you notice, because it almost never happens. He had come down from the plant rooms at the word body the way a king comes down from a tower when the city's on fire. "Inspector," Wolfe said, voice smooth as old brandy, "you will not remove my assistant without cause." Kramer's eyes flicked toward Wolfe like they were wired to a magnet. "Cause? A dead man's got your address, Wolfe." Wolfe's eyelids lowered. "That is not cause. That is coincidence. Or a contrivance." "Save it," Kramer growled. "Goodwin's coming in. And that shivering kid of yours, Hart, he can come too." At the mention of his name, Calvin Hart stepped into view from the office. He looked worse than he had an hour ago, which took talent. "I didn't do anything," he blurted. "I didn't say you did," Kramer snapped. "But you're mixed in it. Come on." Wolfe's mouth tightened. "Mr. Hart will remain here." Kramer's laugh was short and humorless. Not if you want him alive. Crane's office was a locked room. Whoever did it wanted a message delivered. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. That word, message, was the kind of bait that hooks him cleanly. Violence is crude, language is art. Wolfe has always preferred the weapon that leaves no blood on the carpet. Very well, Wolfe said. Archie will accompany you. Mr. Hart will remain here, under my protection. Kramer opened his mouth. Wolfe raised a hand, and somehow that hand weighed more than Kramer's badge. If Mr. Hart leaves this house, Wolfe said, it will be because you arrest him. Do you? Kramer glared. His eyes flicked to Hart, who looked like he'd faint if someone said the word handcuffs. Not yet, Kramer said. But I'm watching him. That, Wolfe said, is your vocation. I cut in before the two of them started exchanging legal citations. I'll go, I told Kramer. You can glare at me in the car. It's your favorite exercise. 10 minutes later I was in a police sedan smelling of wet wool and coffee that had died in a cup. We rolled down 9th Avenue with the siren off. Kramer never wastes noise unless he's making a point. You know Crane? He asked. Only by reputation, I said. The kind that makes authors drink. Kramer grunted. He was found at his desk. Door locked from the inside. No forced entry. Window closed. No weapon. Just him, dead as last week's fish. And a stack of pages on the desk with a wrapper. A manuscript, I said. Yeah. And on the wrapper, typed, delivered to Nero Wolfe, 35 West 35th Street. That's not our address, I said, because I'm annoyingly literal. Kramer shot me a look. Close enough to find you, smart guy. I filed that away. Close enough. Not exact. Either the typist didn't care, or they didn't know. Both were useful. At police headquarters they walked me through the usual routine, stairs, paperwork, and the feeling that you're an exhibit. Then they took me to Crane's office on West 47th, in a building that housed 2 law firms, a dentist, and one man who made his living by telling other people their words were garbage. Crane's office was small, neat, and smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke and fresh ink. His desk sat near the window, a green-shaded lamp tilted over it like a stern eye. Hollis Crane sat behind the desk, slumped in his chair. He wasn't dramatic about it, no theatrical sprawl. Just the posture of a man whose spine had decided to retire. His face was pale with a peculiar bluish tint around the lips. His right hand rested on the manuscript pages as if he'd been holding them down when the lights went out. Poison? I asked. Kramer nodded. Me says likely. We'll know more later. I looked around. Locked room, no forced entry. Either Crane invited his killer in and then locked the door himself, polite to the end, or the lock's been played. Kramer pointed at the knob. We checked. Simple latch, old style. No sign of tampering. I stepped closer, careful not to touch. The window was shut. The radiator hissed softly. Outside, the city moved with its usual indifference. The manuscript lay on the desk in a thick stack, bound with twine. The wrapper was brown paper, folded like a butcher's package. On it, typed neatly, was the delivery line to Wolfe, almost correct, annoyingly wrong. Who found him? I asked. His secretary, Kramer said, and jerked his head toward a woman standing stiffly near the filing cabinet. She was in her early 30s, dark hair pinned back severely, eyes red but dry, like she'd already cried on someone else's time. This is Miss Janet Rusk, Kramer said. You want to ask your clever questions, ask them. I smiled at her, my friendly face. Miss Rusk. Rough morning. She swallowed. I came in at 9. He didn't answer. He always answers. I used my key, couldn't open it. The door was locked. I called the building manager. He got the superintendent. They opened it. With a key? I asked. No, she said. The super used a little tool. Like a thin strip. He slid it under a shim, I said. Kramer's eyes narrowed. They told you that? She shook her head. No. My brother's a locksmith. That was one small, sharp detail. I glanced at the door. If the super opened it with a shim, the lock could be defeated. Locked room mystery solved. Not quite, because that still didn't explain why the killer bothered locking it at all. I asked, was anyone here last night? Crane's secretary hesitated. He worked late. Sometimes. But last night, he had an appointment. With who? I said. I don't know, she said, then added quickly, he didn't tell me. That was natural. Critics don't share their secrets, they sell them. I looked at the manuscript. Is that his? Something he was reading? She stared at it like it might bite. No. It was delivered yesterday afternoon. No return address. He said, her voice wavered. He said it was the kind of book that gets people killed. He laughed. Kramer snorted. Not laughing now. I leaned in and read the first page without touching it. The type was clean, the margins wide. At the top, The Ashes of Winter. Calvin Hart's novel. So the Phantom publisher, or whoever liked wearing the mask, had carried it to Crane. Either to threaten him, bribe him, or shut him up. Did Crane write anything about that book? I asked. Miss Rusk nodded. He was going to. He said he'd publish the review this week. What kind of review? I asked. Her mouth twisted. There are no good ones from Hollis Crane. I turned to Kramer. So the critic trashes Hart's book. The publisher threatens him. The critic dies holding the manuscript, and the package is addressed to Wolfe. That's a nice little chain. Kramer's face said he didn't enjoy the adjective nice. We also found this. He pointed to the desk blotter. Beneath the lamp, half covered by Crane's hand, was a small rectangle of paper. Not a note, more like a torn corner. Kramer used tweezers to lift it. On it was a printed emblem, an ornate serif V inside a circle, like a publisher's colophon. Vane House? I asked. Maybe, Kramer said. Or maybe somebody wants us to think so. That's Kramer's idea of philosophy, when in doubt, assume somebody is messing with you. Let me see the wrapper again, I said. Kramer nodded, and I leaned closer. The paper had a faint watermark, only visible at an angle where the window light caught it. It wasn't Vane House. It was something else, a faint pattern like interlocking lilies, the kind you see on high-end stationery. And, this was the part that made my eyebrows climb, there was a tiny, almost invisible impression near the fold, like a stamp had been pressed there once and removed. A ghost of ink. An absence that still had shape. Wolfe would like that. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe in the office where he belonged, planted in his armchair like a monument. Fritz had set a tray near him, beer, neatly poured, and a plate of something that smelled sinful. Wolfe's eyes flicked to me. Well, he asked. Crane's dead, I said. Poison, probably. Locked room, but not as locked as advertised. The manuscript was Hart's book, delivered yesterday. And the wrapper was typed, almost our address, not quite. Plus a colophon mark, fancy V, and paper good enough to make a banker blush. Wolfe took a slow sip of beer. You have brought me crumbs, he said. Where is the loaf? I dropped into my chair and pulled out my notebook. The loaf is this: someone wants the world to believe in Elias Vane. They're using printing, paper, and theatrical threats like props. Crane was killed with the manuscript in his hand, like a staged photograph. Wolfe's eyes narrowed, pleased in spite of himself. Continue. And, I added, we have a new name, Janet Rusk, Crane's secretary, whose brother is a locksmith. And a superintendent who opened the locked door with a shim. Wolfe waved that away. Trifles. Sure, I said. Trifles that can open doors. Wolfe's gaze shifted to Calvin Hart, who had been sitting rigidly on the sofa like an unpaid statue. Hart's eyes were wide. He looked as if Crane's blue lips were printed on the air. Mr. Hart, Wolfe said softly, you told Archie your publisher threatened Crane. Did you hear him do so? Hart's voice came out thin. No. He told me Crane would regret it. He said critics don't understand consequences. Wolfe leaned forward a fraction. And did you regret signing with Vane House? Hart flinched. No. He gave me an advance. He promised distribution, reviews, bookstore placement. Wolfe's tone sharpened. Then you admit you were eager. And therefore careless. Mr. Hart, you are either lying or stupid. Hart's face flushed with panic and shame. I met him, he insisted. I met Elias Vane. He sat across from me. He had a scar. On his left cheek, I said. Hart nodded quickly. Wolfe's eyes bored into him. Describe his voice. Hart blinked. Low. Calm. Like someone who never rushes. Wolfe leaned back. How interesting. That is the voice of an editor, not a financier. An editor speaks as if words must obey him. I stared at Wolfe. You're saying. I am saying nothing, Wolfe cut in. Not yet. The phone rang then, sharp, urgent. I picked up. A voice breathed, slow and wet, then a distorted whisper, as if spoken through cloth, the next edition is your last. The line clicked dead. For a second, the office was very quiet except for the faint, clean scent of orchids drifting down the stairs, Wolfe's peaceful jungle pretending this was an ordinary day. Wolfe's eyes closed briefly, as if tasting the message. Then he opened them and looked at me. Archie, he said, tonight you will go out. You will find the office that does not exist. And you will find the woman called Lorna Pike. I stood up, feeling the city's shadows begin to gather outside like an audience waiting for the next act. Sure, I said. Because in New York, the easiest thing in the world is finding a ghost. Chapter 3, The Invisible Empire. There's a special smell to Madison Avenue at night, hot asphalt, cold money, and the aftershave of men who don't sweat. I caught it the moment I stepped out of the cab in front of the Langford building, collar up, hat down, feeling like an extra who'd wandered into the wrong picture. Suite 1206. Vacant, according to information. Vacant, according to the building directory. Vacant, according to everyone except the one man who swore he'd signed his future away there. I like vacancies. They don't argue back. The Langford was one of those pre-war office buildings that tried to look dignified by never admitting it needed repairs. Brass fixtures dulled by decades of hands, marble floors worn smooth by ambition. The night doorman eyed me like I might be trouble with a capital T. Looking for someone? He asked. Always, I said. Suite 1206. His eyebrows lifted just enough to show surprise, then settled. That suite's empty. Has been forever? I asked. Long as I've been here. 3 years. Ever see a man named Elias Vane? I asked casually. He shook his head. No, sir. Secretary named Lorna Pike. That got a pause. Just a pause, but pauses talk. Miss Pike, he said slowly. Yeah. She comes by sometimes. I smiled. Vacant offices get visitors now. He frowned. She doesn't go up. She waits in the lobby. Makes phone calls. Sometimes meets a man. What man? He shrugged. Different ones. Different ones. That was interesting. Different meant plural. Plural meant organization. I thanked him and took the elevator anyway, because I don't like taking no for a final answer until I've exhausted the stairs. The elevator rattled up like it had opinions about gravity. On 12, the doors opened to a quiet corridor, lights dimmed to after-hours mode. Suite 1206 sat at the end, door shut, looking innocent. It was locked. Naturally. I didn't have a shim, but I had patience and a good ear. I pressed close, listening. Nothing. No hum, no whisper of ventilation. Vacant, all right. But the carpet in front of the door told a different story. It was worn. Not evenly, like neglect, but tracked, like feet had stood there often. And near the baseboard, just inside the threshold, was a faint smudge, printer's ink, by the look of it. Black, oily, stubborn. Vacant offices don't leak ink. I went back down and stepped outside to call Wolfe. The phone booth smelled like old secrets and newer cigarettes. Archie, Wolfe said, voice rich and unhurried, as if I'd interrupted a pleasant thought. Suite's officially empty, I said. Unofficially, it's busy. Ink on the carpet, worn threshold, and a secretary who waits downstairs and meets different men. Wolfe made a pleased sound. An empire, he said, without a throne. Continue. I want Lorna Pike, I said. She's the only constant. Yes, Wolfe agreed. She is the hinge. I hung up and went hunting. It took 2 hours, 3 taxi rides, and a coffee at a diner that specialized in existential despair, but I found her at last, in a lunchroom off 42nd that pretended it was still daytime by keeping all the lights on. Lorna Pike sat alone in a booth, stirring a cup she wasn't drinking. She was mid-30s, well-dressed but tired, with the kind of face that learned early how to look pleasant under pressure. I slid into the booth opposite her. Miss Pike, I said. She startled. Do I know you? No, I said. But I know Elias Vane. Her spoon stopped. That's impossible, she said. So is he, I replied. Yet here we are. She looked around, then back at me. I don't know what you're talking about. That's fine, I said. I'll talk. You listen. I told her about Hollis Crane. About the manuscript. About the phone calls. I didn't embellish. The truth was sharp enough. When I finished, she sat very still. I never hurt anyone, she said finally. I didn't say you did, I told her. I said you were the hinge. Her lips pressed together. You should leave me alone. That depends, I said. Are you next? Her eyes flicked up. Fear, real, this time. I typed letters, she said quietly. Contracts. Reviews. Threats. For Elias Vane, I said. For whoever he was that week, she replied. Sometimes he was a publisher. Sometimes an editor. Sometimes a lawyer. The names changed. The voice didn't. That matched Wolfe's thought. Editors don't rush. Who was he? I asked. She shook her head. I never met him face to face. Only calls. Always from different numbers. Always calm. Who paid you? Checks, she said. Different companies. Shells. And the office? She gave a small laugh. It was never rented. He said offices were liabilities. That was good. Wolfe would enjoy that line. I stood. You should come with me. No, she said quickly. If he knows I talked. He already knows you exist, I said. That's worse. She hesitated, then nodded. Give me 5 minutes. She never got them. The door to the lunchroom banged open. A man came in fast, coat too heavy for the weather, hat pulled low. He spotted us immediately. I grabbed Lorna's wrist and yanked her sideways just as the man reached into his coat. Something clattered to the floor, a small metal cylinder that rolled, hissing. Ink. The stink of it hit my nose, a sharp chemical reek. Move! I yelled. We hit the floor behind the counter as the cylinder burst, spraying black fluid everywhere. The man bolted. I scrambled up and chased him into the street, but he vanished into traffic like he'd rehearsed it. By the time I got back, Lorna was shaking but alive, splattered with ink like she'd lost a fight with a printing press. "Message," I said grimly. She nodded. "He uses ink. Says it's poetic." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened without interrupting, fingers steepled, eyes half closed. Fritz brought beer. Wolfe drank it as if nothing in the world had changed. "You see," Wolfe said when I finished, "how power is maintained without visibility. Contracts, threats, money, none requiring a face." "Crane saw the face," I said. "Or thought he did." "Indeed," Wolfe said. Mr. Hart's description was theatrical. Scar, elegance. A fiction. Calvin Hart, pale as ever, sat rigidly on the sofa. "You're saying I was tricked?" Wolfe looked at him. "You were recruited." Hart's mouth opened. Closed. "The manuscript," Wolfe went on, "was a ledger. Critics, agents, editors, each chapter encoding transactions. Mr. Crane recognized this. And got killed for it," I said. "Yes," Wolfe said. "Words kill when they threaten exposure." The phone rang again. I answered. A voice this time, undistorted, amused. "Mr. Goodwin," it said. "You are energetic. But energy without comprehension is dangerous." I felt the hairs rise on my neck. "Who is this?" "Someone who publishes reputations," the voice replied. "Good night." Click. I looked at Wolfe. He smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. "He grows impatient," Wolfe said. "Good. So do I." Outside, the city hummed, unaware it was standing on a network of paper, ink, and lies. And somewhere in that network, a man without a name was starting to feel real pressure. Chapter 4, Ink, Paper, and Blood. If you want to know how quickly a city can feel small, try being chased through it by someone who knows the back exits better than you do. I learned that lesson the hard way, again, on a night when the rain came down sideways and the streetlights made puddles look like traps. The ink attack at the lunchroom had rattled Lorna Pike more than she let on. By the time I got her into a cab and aimed it toward the brownstone, her hands were steady, but her eyes kept checking the mirrors like they expected a face to bloom there. "Relax," I told her. "If they wanted you dead, they wouldn't waste ink." "That's what he said," she murmured. "Ink is a warning. Blood is a conclusion." Comforting philosophy, that. We were 2 blocks from Wolfe's place when the cab jerked to a stop. The driver cursed. A delivery truck had stalled in the lane, its back doors yawning open like a mouth. "Stay put," I told Lorna, already moving. That's when someone came out of the shadows behind the truck. He moved fast, head down, gloved hands out. I didn't wait for introductions. I hit him with my shoulder and we both went into the wet street. Something hard clipped my ear, pain flared, and then the man was scrambling away. I rolled, grabbed his coat, and came up with nothing but fabric. He vanished between parked cars. I stood there breathing rain and adrenaline while the cab driver yelled questions I didn't answer. When we reached the brownstone for real, Wolfe was waiting in the office like he'd known the scene would come to him rather than the other way around. Fritz hovered nearby with a dish towel, disapproval baked in. "You are bleeding," Wolfe observed. "Just my ear," I said. It disagreed with something. Lorna Pike sat rigid on the sofa, ink stains still ghosting her coat like bruises. Wolfe studied her for a long moment. "You have been attacked," Wolfe said. "Yes," she said. "Again." "Good," Wolfe replied mildly. "It suggests progress." I shot him a look. "You want to dial that down a notch?" "No," Wolfe said. "I do not." He turned to Lorna. "You will tell me everything. Names, dates, payments. Not interpretations. Facts." She nodded. I typed contracts, reviews, threat letters. Everything went through me. I was the voice on paper. Whose voice? Wolfe asked. She hesitated. I don't know his real name. Describe his habits, Wolfe said. He corrected grammar, she said quickly. Always. Even in threats. Especially in threats. That made Wolfe's eyes gleam. Editors, he said, almost to himself, are incapable of resisting correction. I leaned against the desk. Ink attack, I said. Chemical stuff. Smells like printer's ink. Used to hide fingerprints. Wolfe nodded. Ink is an editor's blood. That was poetic enough for him. The phone rang. I answered. Goodwin, I said. A familiar voice, Inspector Kramer's, came on, rough and tired. You sitting down? I always am, I said. It's my profession. We got another one, Kramer said. The typesetter. My stomach sank. Which one? Name's Harold Finch. Freelance. Found dead in his shop in Queens. Press still warm. That did it. Ink had turned to blood. Wolfe's eyes closed for a moment, then opened with decision. Mr. Finch knew too much. Kramer snorted. He knew how to keep his mouth shut. Someone opened it for him. I hung up and looked at Wolfe. Typesetter dead. Press warm. That means the Empire's sweating. Indeed, Wolfe said. Now we collect suspects. He had me bring them in like chess pieces. First came Gerald Sloane, a disgraced editor who'd been fired from 3 publishing houses for ethical disagreements, which in his case meant selling secrets to competitors. He arrived indignant and overdressed, eyes sharp with old grudges. Then Marion Bell, a rival publisher whose smile could cut glass. She wore mourning black as fashion, not grief. Next, Victor Hale, a literary agent with the faintly desperate air of a man whose debts outran his commissions. And finally, quietly, Peter Ames, a typesetter's assistant, pale and shaking, hands stained permanently with ink that no soap could touch. They sat in Wolfe's office under the weight of orchids and expectation. Wolfe addressed them like a judge who didn't bother with pretense. You are here, he said, because someone among you participates in a fiction. Sloane scoffed. I don't play games. On the contrary, Wolfe said, you have made a career of them. Bell smiled thinly. Is this about Crane? I criticized him for years. Yes, Wolfe said. With words. Hale shifted. I represent writers. That's not a crime. It is, Wolfe said, when done incompetently. Peter Ames said nothing. He stared at his hands. I watched them all, because that's my job. Sloane sweated when Wolfe mentioned contracts. Bell's eyes flicked to Lorna Pike. Hale flinched at the word ledger. Ames. Ames reacted when Wolfe said typesetter. Mr. Ames, Wolfe said gently, Mr. Finch trained you. Yes, Ames whispered. And taught you about paper, Wolfe said. Watermarks. Marks invisible to the eye. Ames swallowed. Yes. I leaned in. Like the faint impression on the wrapper Crane had. Ames's head jerked up before he could stop it. There it was. Bell rose. This is absurd. I'm leaving. Wolfe didn't move. Sit down, Mrs. Bell. She did, slowly. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Someone has been using the publishing world as a laundering system. Reviews hide transactions. Advances conceal bribes. Editors enforce silence. Critics are neutralized. Sloane laughed harshly. You think I built this? I got fired for speaking out. Or, Wolfe said, for being excluded. That hit Sloane like a slap. A messenger arrived then, a courier envelope delivered late, breathless. I took it, opened it. Inside was a contract. Forged. It bore the Vane House letterhead and a signature identical to the one Hart had shown me, but the paper was wrong. Cheaper. No watermark. Wolfe examined it and smiled faintly. A forgery, he said. Crude. Done in haste. And addressed to whom? I asked. Wolfe read aloud, transfer of all rights, to Gerald Sloane. The room went very quiet. Sloane stood. That's a lie. Sit, Wolfe said, louder now. Sloane's face was blotchy. Someone's framing me. Possibly, Wolfe said. Or you have been careless. Peter Ames made a small sound. Mr. Finch, he said something last night. He said someone was rushing. That the marks were sloppy. Wolfe's eyes locked on him. Who rushed? Ames shook his head. I don't know. He wouldn't say. Wolfe leaned back. Then Mr. Finch paid for that discretion. The air felt heavy. Outside, a taxi honked. Life went on. Wolfe dismissed them all with a wave. You will remain available, he said. Do not travel. When they were gone, I exhaled. We're close. Yes, Wolfe said. Close enough to provoke violence. And? I said. And, Wolfe continued, the killer has revealed impatience. He has forged when he should have waited. I thought of ink sprayed like blood. Ink's not enough anymore. Wolfe nodded. The fiction is collapsing. He rose, slowly, deliberately, and returned to his armchair. Fritz brought beer. Wolfe sipped, serene. Outside, the city kept breathing. And somewhere in it, someone had crossed the line from editing lives to ending them. Chapter 5, The Author's Secret. There are moments in a case when the room feels too tidy. Everything is in place, the suspects have been lined up and dusted off, and the answers seem to be waiting politely for the right question. That's when I get nervous. Neatness is a lie New York tells tourists. It was late afternoon in the brownstone, that hour when the light slants through the front windows and turns Wolfe's orchids into pale, judgmental ghosts. Fritz had just cleared away lunch, done with criminal competence, and Wolfe had settled into his armchair with a beer, content as a man who believes time should adjust itself to his digestion. Calvin Hart sat across from him, perched on the edge of a chair like a man afraid of leaving fingerprints on furniture he didn't own. He'd been quiet since the typesetter's murder. Quiet, in my experience, usually means thinking, or hiding. Wolfe broke the silence the way he breaks everything, deliberately. Mr. Hart, he said, you have been patient. That is commendable. It is also suspicious. Hart blinked. I don't understand. You will, Wolfe said. Archie. I leaned forward. Calvin, we've been dancing around you like you're a vase we don't want to knock over. I'm tired of dancing. Hart's face flushed. I told you everything. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. No. You told us what you wished to be true. Now you will tell us what is. Hart swallowed. I'm the victim here. Wolfe made a small dismissive sound. Victims are rarely so uninformed. He leaned forward, massive hands resting on the desk. You claimed ignorance of Elias Vane's nature. Yet you accepted an advance from a publisher with no address, no phone number, and no witnesses. Hart's mouth opened, closed. I was desperate. So are many fools, Wolfe said. They do not all survive. I added gently, Calvin, your book wasn't just a novel. That did it. His shoulders sagged like he'd been carrying a trunk full of stones. No, he said quietly. It wasn't. Wolfe nodded once. Proceed. Hart rubbed his hands together. I was broke. I owed money. Gambling, nothing glamorous. Then a man contacted me. Said he admired my style. Said fiction was the safest place to hide truth. Truth about what? I asked. Money, Hart said. Payments. Bribes. Who owed whom? Wolfe's eyes glinted. A ledger disguised as literature. Hart nodded miserably. He told me to write it as a novel. To bury names in metaphors. To use critics as markers. Editions as transactions. And you agreed, Wolfe said. I needed the advance, Hart whispered. He said no one would get hurt. I snorted. They always say that right before someone does. Hart flinched. I didn't know about the killings. You knew enough, Wolfe said coldly. You knew the publisher was not real. Hart shook his head. I knew the name was fake. I thought the man was cautious. Wolfe leaned back, disgusted. Cautious men do not murder critics. The phone rang, cutting the tension like a blade. I answered. Goodwin, I said. Kramer's voice came through, rougher than usual. You sitting down? I'm always sitting down, I said. Wolfe insists. The typesetter's assistant, Kramer said. Peter Ames. Found dead an hour ago. The room went cold. How? I asked. Stabbed, Kramer said. Quick and ugly. No ink this time. I closed my eyes. Another loose end cut short. Wolfe's face was grim when I related. The Empire is shedding witnesses, he said. I expected this. Hart's eyes were wide. This is because of me. Yes, Wolfe said. And because of greed. He turned to me. Archie, bring me the manuscript. I fetched Hart's novel from the desk drawer where it had been sitting like a coiled snake. Wolfe took it reverently, opening it to random pages, scanning lines with the intensity of a priest reading forbidden scripture. Observe, Wolfe said. Chapter 7. The Metaphor of Winter Deaths. I leaned over. It read like moody prose, snow, silence, obligation, but Wolfe tapped a sentence. Replace snow with cash, he said. Replace footprints with names. It is elementary. You see patterns where other people see poetry, I said. That, Wolfe replied, is why they pay me. He closed the book. Mr. Hart, who else knew this was a ledger? Hart hesitated. The agent. Victor Hale. He helped structure it. Wolfe's lips curled. Of course. Agents profit from ignorance. I made a note. Hale was moving up the list. Night fell the way it always does in New York, sudden and unapologetic. The brownstone felt sealed against it, warm with lamplight and orchids, but the city pressed close, listening. A late call came in, this time without breathing or distortion. Mr. Wolfe, a calm voice said when I answered and handed the phone over. Your assistant is persistent. Wolfe didn't react. You mistake persistence for inevitability, he said. A chuckle. You're enjoying this. No, Wolfe said. I am irritated. Then we understand each other, the voice replied. Your author friend made promises he can't keep. Wolfe's eyes flicked to Hart. The only promise of value, Wolfe said, is the one that ends this conversation. Click. Hart looked like he might collapse. He's going to kill me. Wolfe regarded him coolly. Possibly. But not before he attempts to recover his investment. And how does he do that? I asked. By reclaiming the manuscript, Wolfe said. Or by silencing everyone who can decode it. That included us. Wolfe rose heavily and went to the window, peering out at the wet street below where headlights slid like knives. Archie, he said, tomorrow you will visit Victor Hale. He will be nervous. He's always nervous, I said. It's his personality. Now, Wolfe said, it will be his guilt. He turned back to Hart. Mr. Hart, you will remain here. You will not answer the phone. You will not touch my orchids. Hart nodded fervently. As Fritz cleared glasses, the house settled into an uneasy quiet. I felt it then, the shift. The point where a puzzle stops being abstract and starts to bleed. Hart's secret had given us motive. The murders had given us urgency. And somewhere out there, a man who corrected grammar in his threats was realizing his careful fiction was coming apart at the seams. That's when killers make mistakes. And Wolfe lives for mistakes. Chapter 6, The Grammar of Guilt. If you want to learn something about a man, don't ask him questions. Read what he writes. The trick is convincing him you're too dumb to notice the commas. Wolfe knew that long before I did, which is why he stayed home that morning with his orchids and his beer while he sent me out into the city like a bookmark slid between two dangerous pages. Victor Hale's office was on 44th, above a travel agency that sold dreams with small print. The elevator operator gave me the look that says I've seen better men than you, go up and come down poorer. I tipped him anyway. Habit. Hale's secretary buzzed me in after one glance at my card. She had the expression of a woman who'd spent years apologizing for her employer's nerves. Victor Hale himself rose from behind his desk like a man surprised to find he still had legs. He was thin, neatly dressed, and sweating in places the air conditioning should have saved. "Mr. Goodwin," he said. "To what do I owe?" "Coffee," I said, and sat down without waiting. "Black. No sugar. Like your conscience." He laughed too quickly. "You have a reputation." "Yeah," I said. "It follows me around like a bad review." I looked around. His office was tasteful, too tasteful. Law books, framed dust jackets, a typewriter he probably hadn't used since Roosevelt was in office. The kind of place where nothing accidental ever happened. "I represent writers," Hale said, settling back into his chair. "If this is about Calvin Hart." "It is," I said. "Among others." His fingers twitched. "Hart's book caused controversy." "That's not a crime." "No," I agreed. "But editing the ledger hidden inside it might be." He stiffened. "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you do," I said. "You help structure it. The metaphors. The chapters. You knew where the numbers were buried." His jaw clenched. "That's an accusation." "Relax," I said. "It's a conversation." I pulled out my notebook. "Tell me about Elias Vane." Hale's smile was tight. "I never met him." "That makes two of us," I said. "But you spoke to him." Hale hesitated. Briefly. "How many times?" I asked. "Enough." "Voice?" I said. He looked up sharply. "What?" "Describe the voice," I repeated. Hale swallowed. "Cultured. Precise. Corrected your grammar?" I asked lightly. "That did it." His eyes flicked away. I leaned forward. "Editors can't help themselves." "I didn't kill anyone," Hale said quickly. "Good," I said. "Because we've already got two dead men who disagree with you." He went pale. "Crane and Finch. And Ames," I added. "Three men who knew too much about ink and paper." Hale's shoulders sagged. "I was afraid this would happen." "Funny," I said. "So were they." I stood. "You might want to pack a bag. Inspector Kramer's patience is shorter than mine." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened as I reported, eyes half closed, fingers steepled. The scent of orchids hung heavy in the air, the calm before a storm that knew better than to disturb Wolfe's schedule. "Victor Hale is a coward," Wolfe said. "Useful only insofar as he leaks." "Who's not leaking," I said, "is the man who writes like he's grading papers." Wolfe nodded. "Yes. I have been reading." He gestured to a neat stack on his desk, contracts, letters, reviews, threats, everything Lorna Pike had typed, everything we'd collected from Crane's office and Finch's shop. "I arranged them chronologically," Wolfe said. "Then stylistically." "Of course you did," I said. "I arrange my socks by mood." Wolfe ignored that. Observe the punctuation. He handed me 2 letters. Both were threats. Different letterheads. Different signatures. Same habits. Oxford, I said. Precisely, Wolfe said. And an insistence on which instead of that. A pedantry common among editors trained before the war. So our phantom isn't just an editor, I said. He's an old school one. Yes, Wolfe said. One who believes language is authority. The phone rang. I answered. Goodwin, Kramer's voice said. We picked up Hale. That was fast, I said. He panicked, Kramer said. Tried to run. Found forged contracts in his briefcase. Doesn't mean he's our man, I said. I know, Kramer growled. But he's singing. After I hung up, Wolfe smiled faintly. The chorus grows. We gathered everyone again that evening, Sloane, Bell, Hale, now pale and cooperative, Lorna Pike, and Hart, under Wolfe's roof. The room felt like a courtroom dressed as a library. Wolfe addressed them calmly. You have all participated, willingly or otherwise, in a system of control. Sloane sneered. You think words did this? Yes, Wolfe said. Words are cheaper than bullets. He turned to Bell. You financed distribution. To appear legitimate. Bell's eyes flashed. Business. Indeed, Wolfe said. You profited from silence. To Hale, you facilitated authorship. Hale nodded miserably. To Lorna Pike, you were the instrument. She met his gaze steadily. I typed what I was told. And to Mr. Hart, Wolfe said, you provided camouflage. Hart looked broken. I didn't know it would come to this. Few do, Wolfe said. That is why they agree. I watched their faces. One of them wasn't worried enough. Wolfe continued. The murders were not impulsive. They were editorial decisions. Crane was killed because he recognized the ledger. Finch because he noticed sloppy marks. Ames because he heard too much. Sloane laughed harshly. You make it sound tidy. It was, Wolfe said. Until impatience intruded. The phone rang then, on cue, like a line delivered too early. I answered. Goodwin. The familiar calm voice came through, unmasked now. You've been busy. Yes, I said. You'd be proud. Your grammar gave you away. A pause. Then a soft chuckle. Language is a fingerprint, the voice said. Yours is careless. Funny, I said. We were just saying the same about yours. The line went dead. I looked at Wolfe. He nodded. He knows. Which means? I asked. Which means, Wolfe said, he will attempt to act before I finish. That night, I couldn't sleep. The brownstone creaked like an old ship. Somewhere below, a car backfired. I thought about commas and watermarks and the arrogance of men who believe they can edit reality. In the morning, Wolfe sat serene, beer untouched, orchids thriving. Today, he said, we end the fiction. And tomorrow? I asked. Wolfe smiled thinly. Tomorrow, Archie, we publish the truth. Outside, the city waited, full of words that hadn't yet learned they could kill. And somewhere close, a man who believed himself invisible was about to be very clearly seen. Chapter 7, The Phantom Unmasked. If there's one thing Nero Wolfe enjoys more than being right, it's being right in his own house, on his own schedule, with witnesses arranged like furniture. By early evening the brownstone had that particular stillness it gets before a storm, quiet, expectant, smelling faintly of orchids and roasted meat. Fritz had outdone himself on dinner, which Wolfe had finished with surgical calm, and now my employer sat planted in his red leather armchair like a judge who had already written the verdict but was willing to hear closing arguments for sport. They arrived one by one. Victor Hale came first, escorted by Inspector Kramer, who looked like he'd misplaced a good mood somewhere between headquarters and our front door. Hale's tie was crooked and his eyes darted around the room as if the furniture might testify. Marion Bell followed, immaculate and composed, wearing an expression that said she'd rather be anywhere else but would make do. Gerald Sloane came in behind her, carrying his indignation like a briefcase he'd never let go. Lorna Pike arrived quietly, pale but resolute, and finally Calvin Hart, who looked like a man attending his own wake. They took their places where I pointed them. I shut the door, leaned against it, and folded my arms. This was Wolfe's show, my job was to keep the exits theoretical. Wolfe surveyed them without haste. The desk lamp cast a warm circle of light, leaving the corners of the room in thoughtful shadow. Outside, a taxi honked, impatient with a world that refused to move fast enough. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wolfe began, "you are here because the fiction has failed." Sloane snorted. "This is ridiculous." "Yes," Wolfe agreed. "Reality often is." Bell crossed her legs. "If this is about my business practices." "It is about murder," Wolfe said, gently but firmly. 3 murders. That shut her up. Wolfe's voice filled the room the way good music does, without strain, commanding attention by assuming it. "We have examined ink, paper, punctuation, and profit. We have traced an enterprise that relied on anonymity and fear. Critics were silenced. Printers were eliminated. Assistants were expendable." Hale swallowed audibly. Wolfe continued, "The figure known as Elias Vane does not exist. He is a mask, constructed to intimidate, to enrich, and to erase." I watched their faces. Bell was still, too still. Hale looked like a man waiting for a train he hoped would never arrive. Sloane's jaw was set hard, defensive. Hart stared at the floor. Lorna Pike kept her eyes on Wolfe, as if anchoring herself to his certainty. "The killings," Wolfe said, "were not acts of passion. They were editorial decisions." Sloane laughed sharply. "You keep saying that." "Because it is true," Wolfe said. Hollis Crane recognized a ledger disguised as literature. He intended to expose it. He was removed. Harold Finch noticed irregularities in paper and marks. He was removed. Peter Ames heard too much. He was removed. Kramer shifted his weight, hands on his hips. "You going to name someone, Wolfe?" "In due course," Wolfe said, unperturbed. "Impatience is not my vice." That line earned a grunt from Kramer. Wolfe turned his attention to the desk, where a neat stack of documents lay waiting. "These letters," he said, lifting one, "were written under different names. Different letterheads. Yet they share habits." I caught Hale's eye. He looked away. "An insistence on grammatical precision," Wolfe went on. "An intolerance for error. A belief that language confers authority. These are not the habits of financiers or agents." Sloane shifted. "So now being educated is a crime?" "Education," Wolfe replied, "is a tool. Obsession is a motive." Bell's lips curved in a faint smile. "You're enjoying yourself." "No," Wolfe said. "I am irritated." That smile vanished. Wolfe's gaze moved from face to face, lingering just long enough to make each person uncomfortable. "One of you," he said, "believed he could control the literary world from behind a curtain. That critics could be corrected. That authors could be used. That assistants could be sacrificed." Hart's voice broke the silence. "I didn't know who he was." Wolfe nodded. "No. You knew what he promised." Hart flinched. Wolfe leaned forward a fraction, the movement subtle but unmistakable. "The Phantom relied on 2 things, invisibility and patience. The invisibility failed when the ink became sloppy. The patience failed when witnesses accumulated." Sloane stood abruptly. "This is insane. I'm leaving." I pushed off the door. "Sit down," I said pleasantly. He looked at me, then at Kramer, and sat. Wolfe continued as if nothing had happened. "This afternoon," he said, "I received a call. Everyone stiffened. The voice, Wolfe said, was calm. Correct. Amused. It believed itself superior. I felt the room tighten. It threatened, Wolfe said, not with violence, but with consequence. This is important. Violence is crude. Consequence is editorial. Bell said coolly, you're speculating. No, Wolfe said. I am preparing. Kramer barked, preparing for what? For a confession, Wolfe said. A beat passed. Then two. That's when the back window shattered. Glass exploded inward, spraying the carpet. Someone shouted. I moved without thinking, grabbing Hart and hauling him down as something clattered across the floor, a small metal cylinder. Ink. The familiar chemical stench hit my nose. Down. I yelled. The cylinder burst, black fluid splashing the far wall like a grotesque mural. In the confusion, someone bolted. Bell. Kramer shouted. She was already at the door, coat in hand, moving fast. I lunged, caught fabric, tore a sleeve, but she twisted free with surprising strength. She made it 3 steps before Wolfe's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Stop, Wolfe said. She did. Not because of the word, but because of the certainty behind it. She turned slowly, eyes blazing. You think you've won? No, Wolfe said calmly. I think you have lost your composure. Kramer moved in, hand on his gun. That's enough. Bell laughed, a brittle sound. You don't know anything. Wolfe regarded her with mild curiosity. On the contrary. I know enough to know you acted prematurely. He gestured to the ink-splattered wall. That was a warning. Intended for Mr. Hart. Delivered crudely. You are frightened. Bell's face hardened. You can't prove anything. Wolfe nodded. Not yet. That was the part that surprised her. Kramer cuffed her anyway, because attempted flight has a way of shortening legal debates. Hale sagged with relief that looked suspiciously like guilt. Sloane stared at the floor. Lorna Pike let out a breath she'd been holding for days. As Kramer hauled Bell toward the door, she twisted back. You think I was alone? Wolfe's eyes glittered. I think, he said, that you were not the editor. That stopped her cold. Kramer paused. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Wolfe said, that the Phantom still has a hand on the pen. The room went very quiet again. Bell was taken out, protesting now, her composure finally cracked. When the door closed behind her, I exhaled. So, I said, we're not done. Wolfe settled back into his armchair, unruffled. No. But we are closer. He looked at me. Archie, the Phantom revealed himself tonight, not by identity, but by error. Impatience, I said. Yes, Wolfe agreed. The most damning grammatical mistake. Outside, the city resumed its noise, unaware it had just witnessed a chapter break. I glanced at the ink-stained wall, at the frightened faces, at Wolfe serene in his chair like a man already reading the last page. Whoever the Phantom was, he'd just learned the worst lesson of all. Nero Wolfe doesn't rush. And when he's ready to finish editing, there are no revisions. Chapter 8, The Last Edition. Morning in the brownstone has a particular sound, Fritz in the kitchen, Wolfe's orchids breathing upstairs, and the city outside pretending it has nothing to do with murder. I was nursing coffee and a headache born of ink fumes and unfinished business when Wolfe rang his bell. That bell doesn't ask, it summons. I went in. Wolfe sat exactly where he always sat, massive and composed, a man who believed the world should arrange itself around him, and usually did. On the desk lay a neat stack of papers, aligned with surgical precision. Beside them sat a single envelope, cream-colored, thick, expensive. Archie, Wolfe said, today we conclude. That's my favorite adverb, I said. Who's the author? Wolfe's eyes flicked to the envelope. The only one who remains. By noon, the living room was arranged like a courtroom without the pretense. Inspector Kramer arrived first, suspicious and already annoyed. Lorna Pike came next, pale but steady. Victor Hale followed, escorted, his nerves jangling like loose change. Calvin Hart slipped in quietly, looking smaller than ever. And finally, summoned and fuming, Gerald Sloane. Sloane took in the room with a sneer. This again? Yes, Wolfe said. This time, listen. I closed the door and took my place by it. No exits today. Wolfe waited until Fritz had served beer and withdrawn. Routine mattered. Then he began. The figure called Elias Vane, Wolfe said, was an editorial invention. A fiction designed to intimidate critics, control authors, and launder money through contracts disguised as culture. Sloane rolled his eyes. We've heard this. Not the ending, Wolfe said. He lifted the cream envelope. This arrived this morning. Delivered by hand. No return address. Kramer frowned. You open suspicious mail now? Yes, Wolfe said, when it is inevitable. He slid out the contents, a single page, typed. Wolfe read aloud. You have assembled your chorus. Publish what you like. You cannot prove authorship. He set the page down. Signed, of course, Elias Vane. Sloane laughed. So? Anyone could type that. Indeed, Wolfe said. Anyone could. But not everyone would. He turned to me. Archie, read the final paragraph. I did. It was smug, precise, irritatingly elegant. And there it was, the flaw. Which proves, conclusively, that, I stopped and looked up. Which? Wolfe nodded. The same insistence. The same construction. Over years. Across letters, threats, contracts, and reviews. Hale shifted. Lorna Pike's eyes went wide. Wolfe fixed his gaze on Sloane. You were dismissed from publishing houses for selling information. You were excluded from the circles that once defined you. You resented critics who wielded power without accountability. Sloane sneered. Motive isn't murder. No, Wolfe agreed. But method is. He gestured to the stack. You edited them all. You could not resist. You corrected language even when anonymity demanded restraint. Sloane's face reddened. You're guessing. Wolfe shook his head. No. I am reading. He picked up another page. This threat to Hollis Crane contained a printer's mark, a flourish obsolete for 20 years. Used only by editors trained before the war. Finch recognized it. That is why he died. Kramer stepped forward. You're saying Sloane killed Crane, Finch, and Ames? Yes, Wolfe said calmly. Crane by poison delivered during a meeting arranged under the Vane persona. Finch by tampering with his press, an accident made to look occupational. Ames by knife, when haste replaced caution. Sloane exploded. That's insane. Wolfe raised a hand. Archie. I handed him the final item, a small metal plate, wrapped in cloth. Wolfe held it up. A printer's slug. Found in your apartment this morning by Inspector Kramer. It bears the same obsolete flourish. Kramer nodded grimly. Warrant was solid. The room held its breath. Sloane's bravado drained away. You can't prove I was there. No, Wolfe said. But I can prove authorship. He leaned forward. You did not merely commit murder. You edited it. You staged scenes like proofs. You left messages like marginal notes. And finally, you erred. Sloane laughed weakly. Erred how? Wolfe's eyes were cold. You corrected the grammar in your last threat. You could not help yourself. Silence fell like a dropped book. Calvin Hart whispered, you used my novel. Yes, Wolfe said. As camouflage. And when it threatened to expose you, you attempted to reclaim it. Sloane's shoulders sagged. They were ruining everything, he muttered. Critics. Printers. Assistants. They thought they mattered. They did, Wolfe said. That is why they are dead. Kramer moved in, cuffs ready. That's enough. Sloane looked up once, eyes burning. You think you're better than me? Wolfe regarded him with something like pity. I am better than you because I stop. Kramer took him away. The door closed. The house exhaled. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Lorna Pike let out a shaky laugh. It's over. Yes, Wolfe said. The fiction has ended. Kramer lingered. You ever think of making this easier on us? Wolfe sipped his beer. No. When they were gone, police, witnesses, ghosts, the brownstone returned to itself. Afternoon light warmed the wood. Orchids glowed upstairs, indifferent to human drama. Calvin Hart stood uncertainly. What happens to my book? Wolfe waved a hand. It will be published as what it should have been. Fiction. Hart nodded, chastened and relieved. After he left, I sank into a chair. That was a long edit. Yes, Wolfe said. But necessary. I glanced at the desk. You know what gets me? He believed words gave him the right to decide who lived. Wolfe looked thoughtful. Words are powerful, Archie. That is why they require discipline. Outside, a taxi honked. Somewhere, a diner served coffee to people who'd never heard of Elias Vane and never would. Wolfe rang for Fritz. Dinner awaited. Routine restored. As I watched him settle back into his chair, serene and immovable, I thought about the phantom publisher, how he'd built an empire out of paper and fear, and how a single misplaced word had undone him. That's the trouble with believing you're invisible. Someone is always reading.